It looks like we are ready to begin. See, the recording has started. So good day, everyone, and welcome to the Advanced Product Quality Planning and Production Part Approval Process webinar. My name is Russ Palmer. I work for Pratt & Whitney, and it's my privilege here to introduce this subject matter interest group and get things rolling. Carl, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So just to set the stage, the expectations, we are recording today's webinar and it will be available for distribution and sharing. There will also be a live Q&A, so if you please use the chat feature to pre-populate with your questions, the team will get to those and towards the end of the discussion. And one last request, if you please remain on mute during the presentation, just to prevent background noise, that will be appreciated. And like I said, we will have a Q&A at the end. I think the next couple slides actually goes through the introduction and those details. So we've got the overview for the webinar here, again, to go through the subject matter interest group. So each of these different sections will be presented, and you can see that this is really a team sport, right? This is leading members from the aerospace industry that will be giving you a walkthrough of APQP and PPAP, as well as the procedures that go along with those, and some discussion about how APQP and PPAP apply, where does it fit in, and how to execute both of those. And then at the very end of the webinar, we will close with a question and answer session. Next slide, please. So for the Q&A, Magnus and Auke will be providing or at least facilitating the chat feature and giving us an opportunity to look at the questions as they come in, so we can answer them as many as live as possible. Next slide. You will also notice that there is a survey. I believe the QR code is on the next slide for everyone to load and have access to. But Becky is coordinating the survey questions. The responses will be anonymous, but it's a way for us to collect some information regarding the audience and be able to better facilitate these discussions in the future. So if you want to bring the next slide up, give everybody a chance to load this. You can load this on your personal device. I believe it's also on the Slido feature, but that may not work for everybody. So take a few moments here to load this on your cell phone, enter the password, and you'll only have to do this once for this webinar.
Thanks, Russ. We do have the poll open on the screen. If you're able to see it on your computer screen, feel free to answer the poll there. We have 98 votes so far. If you're not able to see it on your computer screen, just scan that QR code real quick and enter that password, and you'll be able to see the questions on your cell phone and answer them there. Good votes are coming in right now. We show 112 votes with 71% saying yes and 29% no. Votes are still pouring in, 132 votes.
Well, it looks like the functionality is working for everybody. I think we've had a chance to load it. I think we can come back to this slide if we need to reference it again if anybody joins and needs access to the survey. Yep. So if everyone is ready, we will step into the meat of today's webinar. I think Ken, I think you're the first one up on the block here.
Yes, thank you very much, Russ. So Ken Hatcher from Raytheon Technologies, which for those who may not be unaware was a merger between UTC and Raytheon, kind of represented across 4 different companies: Raytheon Missiles Defense, Raytheon Intelligent and Space, Pratt Whitney, and Collins Aerospace. Been serving about 20 plus years within the quality, different functions, everywhere from hardware, software, and supplier quality over the past 20 plus years I've been within Raytheon and right now Raytheon Technologies. And so what we're going to discuss a little bit today is going to be high level. Go to the next slide, Carl. We're going to cover kind of a high level kind of, hey, when you think of APQP and PPAP, and those terms get thrown out a lot lately, how does AS 13100 kind of fit in within AS 9145? Now, this is going to be a high level review. We're not going to this isn't going to be line by line, kind of what the changes, the deltas are, but kind of highlight, where you can go to get that information and kind of how the, between the 13100 Chapter B and some of the reference material can help you with implementation within this particular work set. So go ahead, sir. So when you think about it from a foundational aspect, AESQ, wanted to simplify just the numerous amounts of kind of different requirements out there. I think all of us within, whether we're working on programs, just when, working on the program level or within quality or with, e-health, even within some other organizations, there are, regulatory requirements. There's also QMS requirements. There's contractor requirements. There's international standards. So the goal overall was kind of harmonize that effort and kind of determine, how can we simplify this within the Aerospace Engine Supplier Quality Working Group and within that organization? How can we simplify it? So therefore, you can kind of go to one place in order to figure out what are you going to go do to help, ensure these requirements are met, and at the end of the day, ensuring that you reduce risk and are producing compliant product to the end customer from there. And ultimately, that's where the 13100 standard comes into play at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So when you think about it, 9145, it covers that APQP and that PPAP model. It covers aviation, space, and defense. It's a little bit broader. It's covering multiple different, businesses out there. However, what really, when you think about it, okay, really that 13,100, that fits within our community, within the AESQ community. And the other thing that was provided is there's just not a standard in place. And of course, AS 9145, you go to the IAQG website, it provides enablers and such. But what also is in the AS 13100 is a Chapter B and also reference material. One of the best things is that is there is that, like on slide 5, the reference material, 13145, it provides kind of detail. Hey, here's where you can go to find the additional detailed information you need on how a particular, either a particular process or how a particular organization supports that. Those particular deliverables within the 5 phases of APQP. And it's that kind of, tailored level of requirements that kind of provides the detail you need to figure out, okay, what's the difference, especially within the Chapter B going forward. So, and kind of, if you look at it, next slide, if you look at it, really what it comes down to is trying to provide good practices, best practices going forward for simply just providing requirements. What is actually out there and available for you, so to figure out, okay, how can I implement that within the group? The 13,100 and also its RM, provides a good process flow, especially if you go into section 6 and section 7. It gives you that level of detail saying, here's who's responsible for this particular phase. Here's how this would work within whether it's a product life cycle or transition to production, or you're utilizing material readiness levels, saying, how does this fit there? And here's who's responsible for it. Here are the deliverables, and here's how you can go carry this out. And it provides a little bit more clarity on the AS 9145 content. And like I talked about, that page 5 in the RM 13145 document, that also links to other reference material that is out there that helps you support meeting the AS 13100 standard. And then at the same time, that improved APQP management, there's a RACI in there. I know even within our Raytheon Technologies, there's quite a bit of discussion who's responsible for what. Once again, this presents kind of a best practice on, when these events occur, who's the primary responsibility, but also who supports going forward. And also that PPAP management level, the use of submission levels, clarification, when does the data need to be collected? And also, when does resubmission? One of the things we will get into later on here, it talks about, when do you have to go back and resubmit particular data? Is it on just on new product, or what type of major changes take place? That gets put in there also, kind of that provides some guidelines and best practice on what to go do. And at the end of the day, the goal of all this is providing that robust processes and methods that are out there to ensure, that we can be compliant for this, kind of provide that one voice and here's what you need to go do. So we're not trying to have to pull from multiple documents and and maybe even sometimes having some conflicting information. Therefore, we can go to one place, find, hey, this is what we need to go do. If we go do this, we can meet these requirements overall going forward. Next slide. And with that, that's kind of a high level review. I'll give it off to Dan.
Hello, everybody. And so my section here is going to be when does APQP PPAP apply? So I'm Daniel McCarty, the head of quality for precision cast parts, fasteners, and engineered products divisions. So I've been representing PCC structurals because I used to be in structural, so I've been kind of attached to the AESQ as the deputy or delegated voting member for the committee. So I've had a lot of experience with the development of the AS13100 as well as participating in this subcommittee. Next slide, please. So it's January 1st, and you receive a purchase order, and within that purchase order, you're going to either get a flow down from one of the aircraft engine OEMs, such as Rolls-Royce and Sabre, or we can say Pratt Whitney SQR01 or GE S1000. And within that flow down of those requirements, you're going to note that AS13100 is being addressed in there. So you have full flow down, you're incorporated with the AS13100, and you're thinking to yourself, well, I got this new PO, what do I do with it? Okay. I have a lot of legacy product. I have also some new product. Does APQP and PPAP apply or doesn't apply? So there's various elements to consider when we're looking at this, right? So if we have product that has not had a existing APQP or PPAP package previously, then you would consider that legacy product unless you've made some changes, or maybe the customer's made some changes to the design. So if it's a design change, then there's going to be some requirements that are going to be in addition to what you've used to do in regards to product qualification, or you've made some changes at your own facility regarding that process or the inspection or even the tooling. These things are all to be considered. So you ask yourself, okay, so if it's new product, I know I'm going to have to do APQP and PPAP, but if I made one of these changes, where do I go, right? And whether these changes are outside of the customer, is that you made a transfer to another facility, or you've refined a process, made some changes to it that may be considered very significant. And when I talk about significant versus insignificant, whether it's negligible, I think at the end of the day, you'd have to really rely on your point of contact to determine whether or not that, from a customer standpoint, if this is considered significant. However, one of the tests to that is, are you changing anything that may affect the inspection, the form, fit, or function, or other processes that may directly impact the product itself? So that's always a good rule of thumb. But, you have various areas to address with the understanding the requirements, and there's some references here on this presentation, as well as a little bit of a decision tree to help navigate that. So once you've decided that you have to do an APQP and submit a PPAP package, what areas do you address, okay? And it could be, if it's new product, it could be everything. If it's a process change, then it might be a particular element. Next slide, please. Okay, so you have a matrix here, table 10, which is a great tool to help you navigate that, right? So if you look at this table here, and it kind of talks about the different elements of that APQP, and then what situation would apply. So as you notice, there's some footnotes there and whatnot, but you basically go across the top and kind of categorize what change you have, and then roll down to see what elements would be affected. So really great stuff. There's definitely some tools to help you navigate. At the end of the day, if you have any questions, contact your customer rep to get further clarity. There's also the RM13145 that has a lot of good stuff in there to help you navigate, as well as the SAE training courses. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter.
Hello, sorry, this is Mike. My phone disconnected there for a moment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
All right, we'll get moving through. So my name is Michael Feener. I work at GE Aviation Supplier in supplier quality. I'm a supplier quality engineer there. Along with my role in supplier quality, I also work on several APQP implementation teams, working with integrating the source change process, new product introduction, and I also work on a team that helps to communicate within GE and to our supply base how to effectively implement APQP and answer questions as they come up. So I got a pretty broad background within APQP and quality and production. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the Ppap file and the Ppap submission. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to clear things up by talking about a few definitions before we get into the details of the following slides. First one, the Ppap file. So that's a living file containing all the evidence and elements in support of the Ppap requirements. And I'll show you what those elements are in the coming slides. But it's really important to understand that it's a living document, like a DFMEA or like a PFMEA, which are elements of the Ppap file. So that's the biggest takeaway with that definition there. And the second one is the Ppap submission. So this is the package that is provided to the customer. And notice there is a difference between the Ppap file and the Ppap submission. It contains the elements of the Ppap file as defined by the submission level, which we'll get into in the coming slides. But it's really important to understand there is a difference between the Ppap file and the Ppap submission. And then we use the Ppap approval form, which is included with all Ppap submissions, and that verifies what content's provided within the Ppap submission and the status of the Ppap. There are three main levels of status for the Ppap, and we'll get into those as well. And the fourth definition here is the pre-launch control plan. So we wanted to include this definition here. It's really the only place we'll talk about it in the slides that I'll cover, but I wanted to highlight it because there's a difference between the pre-launch control plan and the control plan as I think most of us are more familiar with. So the pre-launch control plan, this is going to include additional process controls from the normal control plan, things that you would run in a design of experiment, or items that you would look at looking if you're utilizing design for Six Sigma going through the house of quality. These additional characteristics or specifications may not be on the final control plan, but in terms of development of the product, you may have characteristics that are important to look at, but not necessarily control in the final production process. So again, that's just an important distinction within that definition for the pre-launch control plan. It won't really talk about in great detail in the coming slides. We'll focus on the Ppap file and then in the submission. Next slide. All right, so as promised, here's a list of the 13 elements to include in the Ppap file. Again, the Ppap file includes all elements of the Ppap that are listed here, regardless of the submission level. And again, we'll talk about what the submission level is in the next couple of slides. The second thing, and it's like I said in the previous slide, it's important to remember that this is real-time information. So as items get updated within this, within these elements, as you update a PFMEA, your Ppap file should be updated. Your Ppap file is housed at the location that is supplying the Ppap. So your Ppap file should be constantly getting updated as PFMEAs, control plans, MSAs, FAIs get updated. It's a living document. And there could be many formats, you know, as long as we're adhering to the requirements of the industry standard for APQP and Ppap, the format in which you're utilizing for a PFMEA, for example, and to create your Ppap submission file, that could vary, and that's okay. And so the Ppap file is really the source of data for all of the Ppap submission. It's where you're going to go pull the data from to submit your Ppap to your customer. And again, there's 13 key elements there to include in your Ppap file. All right, next slide. Okay, here's where we start to talk about Ppap submission, you know, versus the Ppap file. So the submission level is defined by your customer. The items that you will be submitting from the Ppap file is going to be defined by the customer. And there are 5 levels, and I'll show you that table in the next slide. The default is level 3, so take a look at level 3 in the next slide when we get there, kind of give you an idea of what the default to the industry standard is as far as submitting versus not necessarily submitting in the Ppap submission. And we'll talk about the differences in that and the distinction between what to submit and maybe what you keep on file location. And then the submission levels, they're gonna vary, you know, based on the type of product that you have, or the maybe the history of the product. If there's a history of escapes, or we know there's a history of certain items within the FAI reviews that would cause for a different submission level outside of level 3, then that's kind of how the customer usually makes that decision as to what submission level will be provided. What type of change situation is it? Is it a simple process change, or is it a design change that involves you know, a greater number of characteristics? That really defines what's being submitted. And some elements allow for on-site witnessing. So items that you wouldn't, there are items that between the customer and the supplier you would agree that wouldn't be submitted in the Ppap submission, but you would retain in the file and maybe review on-site during a production review during the development cycle, or really at any point in time. And this process flow diagram here comes from the reference manual 13145, as Daniel mentioned before, and the previous presenters also, and it describes really the high-level process of how to submit a Ppap. You have your Ppap file. You're preparing the submission based on the level your customer is requesting. You submit that, and through the various customers you will submit to, they'll have different methods of submitting that Ppap through different softwares, obviously. So there are different mediums of submitting a Ppap, and that's okay too. And then once you get to the approval process, you're really asking, is it a fully approved Ppap, or do we have interim approval? or is it rejected because there's something wrong and we got to go back? So you really got to ask yourself, do I got a green light to ship at the PPAP submission, or are there other items that my customer is asking for before I can ship product? If we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the submission levels. So here's table 11 from AS13100. It describes the submission level, and again, look at SL3 there, submission level 3. That's the default. And over to the left there describes, what is going to be submitted, what to retain at the supplier, but make available upon request to your customer, and then items that will be witnessed on site, marked with a W, and then items that are marked with C could either be submit and or witness on site. And again, think of submission levels in terms of what type of change or the reason you're submitting a PPAP in the first place. Is it new product that you're going through the development cycle for, which may require more to be submitted? Is it a process change, a simple process change where maybe the only thing you need to submit is the FAI along with maybe your control plan? It really depends on what's changing. And Carl and Rob in the following slides and the presenters will talk about change management a little bit and how to decipher that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, 2 more slides left here. So here's the PPAP approval form, or one format. There are multiple formats of the PPAP approval form. And again, this communicates what's being submitted and the status of the PPAP, which is very important. So the status could be approved. You have a fully approved PPAP. All of your elements are approved. You can ship product. You could also have interim approval where you have, most, if not all of your elements submitted in the PPAP, and maybe you're waiting on initial capability studies to come through because you need more production in order to get a higher sample size, in which case your customer would authorize you to ship with a follow-up to submit for final approval. Or you could be in rejected status, which means you cannot ship product, and you have to go back and look at those elements and provide those conforming elements to the customer. And again, there's multiple formats here that you'll see that you'll be asked to fill out. This is the format from the industry standard AS9145. It includes the key elements of the PPAP approval form. So I'm sure they'll be similar as to what you see. All right, next and last slide here. So when we talk about resubmission of the PPAP, and you say you're in interim approval or a rejected status, or you have an approved PPAP and you're performing some type of change management, a PPAP resubmission is required upon any of those situations. And so you're required to submit a PPAP for previously approved product when a change is underway or for a correction. So how do we define previously approved product? I think there's a couple ways you can look at it. So previously approved product, it could be something that has a PPAP already approved that you've submitted to the customer already, and you're performing a change, so you're resubmitting a PPAP, which may be on a different submission level, right? Or come January 1st, maybe you have a situation with your customer where you haven't submitted a PPAP yet, and it's on a legacy or existing product, and you're undergoing a change, and your customer could ask, based on the change, for what's your control plan look like? What does your PFMEA look like? Are you doing MSA studies? And again, this really is dependent on the situation and what the customer is requesting. So come January 1st, when the industry standard is flowed down as a requirement, it could apply in some ways to both existing product or previously submitted product, just based on the situation that you're facing. And so in the next slides, Rob and Carl will both talk about change management. So I'll hand it over to Carl. Thank you very much.
Hopefully you can hear me. I'll just double check that.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So, hello everybody. My name's Carl Evans. I work at Rolls-Royce. I've been involved with APQP and PPAP for many years. I was privileged to be one of the co-writers for the AS9145, the original, wider industry standard. We started that back in 2012 and we published it in 2016. And then more recently, in terms of sort of international standards, I've been lucky enough to take the lead on the AS13100 APQP requirements. And generally in industry, I've been involved in just about every type of functional role you can imagine in various industry, from machine tools to automotive to aerospace and so on. And what I find is that's really helped me contextualize, think about APQP and PPAP in the sense of a cross-functional team and deploying it beyond new product introduction and in all sorts of change situations. So I'm going to have a look at, I'm going to focus on now the first 4 phases of APQP. And we just wanted to take this through a different lens. So bear with me, and I'm going to walk through now some thoughts and ways of thinking about APQP in regards to managing it. And what I'm not going to be doing is trying to pull out line items about requirements and specify requirements. I want to talk about the practices around actually doing APQP in your businesses and your supply chains. So just to sort of recap on a few things that have been said. So when we talk about requirements, if we were to look at AS13100, in respects to APQP and PPAP and requirements, there's actually a very small amount of requirements. The bulk of what AS13100 APQP and PPAP is asking for requirement-wise is go utilise 9145. 9145 was published in 2016. AS13100 was published in 2021. Quite a few years difference between the two. So in terms of requirements and APQP and PPAP and the linkages to the requirements we're looking at today and within our industry, they've been around for quite a considerable amount of time. So what's the piece of the jigsaw that AS13100 APQP and PPAP does? Well, it does give some additional requirements. They are a small amount. They're not a significant number when you look at the 9145. But really the meat of it is around best practice. One of the things, probably one of the key things I would say, the team that put consider the requirements for AS13100 APQP and PPAP and brought out the supporting guidance material was really keen on was actually just how do we enable those requirements through good practice. It's okay specifying requirements, but you actually have to achieve them through good practices. So what's very supportive in what we've been doing around 13100 APQP and PPAP is that the support that's in there in place in regards to best practice. You've had the RM reference manual 13145 quoted a number of times. That's one of a suite of reference manuals that are available. Some people nickname these the gold books. If you're not familiar with them, you can access them off the SAE site. They're free issue. There's no charge for them. They're all good practices that SMEs from industry have contributed to. The backstory to the whole set of gold books is there was over 100 SMEs who got involved with putting that material together. So there's a wealth of knowledge in there. We also have a supporting the 13100. We have subject matter interest groups. Today, you're hearing from members of the APQP and PPAP one, but also against all the gold books, you will actually find there is subject matter interest groups which are there. And we come together and we think about, well, how can we help the industry do this better? So that's a bit of the backdrop to AS13100. So why APQP and PPAP for aerospace? I'm not going to start quoting other industries and what the reasons are for the deployment of APQP and PPAP in, automotive, wind turbine, all sorts of industries have deployed the standard. I'm going to focus on aerospace and what I think is really important about it for aerospace. Firstly, what we have to remind ourselves is that the primary objective of APQP is to improve quality and reduce cost. And that's a common theme wherever you see APQP and PPAP applied across various industries. Probably the resonating note for our industry, aerospace, is there is an incredible amount of synergy between high quality performance, zero defects, and increased product safety. So it's a really strong enabler, as well as improving quality and reducing costs, to increase product safety. Obviously, something we care a lot about in our industry. The graphic I'm showing here, it's some source information that is freely available out on the World Wide Web. It's a really good illustration, I feel, of talking and thinking about the cost of quality through a development cycle. What it's showing initially, so left to right, we are visualizing against time, developing products and processes, and then putting them into production. And then the vertical axis is focusing on the total cost of quality picture. And I do mean that in the holistic sense of total cost. So the first thing you start, or I'll point you to, is the purple line, what refers to the current state. And what that's mapping is the total cost as we develop products and processes, bring them into production, and then continue to develop those. And what you can see is that there's investment, there's total cost up front, but actually we in a current state, a more traditional way of thinking, we tend to go into production and continue to develop the product and process. And the cost base on that is really being driven by escape management, investigations into escapes, quality of escapes, the counteractive actions that need to take place to correct those, which can lead to the need for requalifying product and redesigning product and processes. And what it ends up doing is giving us a very, very long lead time to get to a point of maturity for the product and process itself. If I kind of overlay now thoughts around APQP and PPAP on that picture, there's a few things to draw on. So firstly, I point you to the green curve on this graph. What it is showing is that upfront in the development stage, there is an increase in total cost. The reason for that is there's a level of investment that needs to take place to make APQP and PPAP successful. What's really useful about APQP in terms of our industry is it really provides a set of proactive tools upfront that cross-functional teams can utilize to identify risk and mitigate them early in the development cycle. And the resulting benefit of that is when we're in production, we can flatline that maturity of the product and process earlier. And that has a strong relationship with the total cost. So as a profile, the way of looking at it is APQP does need an investment up front. It's investing time and effort in terms of the teams, the cross-functional teams, and driving them to utilize really good risk identification tools and mitigations, FMEA, understanding the requirements capture up front, the use of DFX up front, a whole host of really proactive tools that really help us identify risks early and enables us to mitigate them. And the longer term benefit is the rate we actually mature in production. So it leads to far faster maturity in terms of the need for fewer engineering change and defects. The final piece really is it puts a really solid foundation in place for ongoing change management. And when I say ongoing change management, I'm talking about design changes to the product, the manufacturing process, transfers, works transfers from one to the other. We get a really good bedrock of engineering that we can then carry over when we manage change in any type of change industry in situation. So that's the reason why pointing some key points in regards to why APQP and PPAP is a really important enabler in our industry to good quality and reduce costs. I want to now take you on a simple view of what APQP is about. I don't want to talk about detailed requirements. What I want to do is present it in a way of thinking about it and utilising it in a more friendly way. So what the starting point is, I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey to view APQP as a flight and see it as your flight path for managing product and process change. Any flight needs a departure point and an arrival point. And the illustration you see on screen now, what's known in 13100 as the APQP and PPAP timing chart, is what you see now. And this really models what the requirements are and expectations are against time. So in other words, a flight path. What do you expect at the starting gate? What do you expect to take place when you're in mid-flight? And then what do you expect to take when you arrive at? And a lot of what we've put in the reference material, the supporting guidance material, helps you understand this flight path and how to enable it in a successful manner. So just to take that a step further now and keep on the thought of viewing APQP as a flight path, I want to break things down, not at a detailed level of what requirements are, but what are the key essence of what we talk about when we talk about APQP. And what you'll find is that the reference manual 13145, the gold book, breaks this information out and focuses on it. So if we're on a flight, we need a starting point. So we need a departure. So what we have in terms of APQP is the planning phase, and it relates to something called planning deliverables. There's a number of these, and they're all about getting the project off the ground. When I say a project, that could be a brand new, engine design and product design. It could be a change to a manufacturing method. It's all about getting you off the ground, and there's a set of deliverables that are itemized in there, and they're all about deploying effective planning upfront and early. The next chunk in terms of APQP is what's known as the APQP PPAP Elements. Now, kind of see these as we've done the planning, we're really understanding what's expected. So we now need to do the detailed work around designing and developing and ultimately validating what we've done. So what we have is a set of elements around that APQP and PPAP ones. And these are really about talking about the specifics that what we should be doing on this journey. We've taken off, we're flying, what are the specific things we need to be doing? And really what harnesses and links all this together is the project plan for the activities that are taking place. And this project plan is really focused on what are the relevant elements to what we are managing, the type of change we're managing, and therefore what are the specifics we should be dealing with on the journey. And they're really pointed at 3 phases of APQP. There's the phase 2, 3, and 4. The product design, development, process design, development, and the validation. So kind of the way you sort of view elements are that they reside in this area relating to these 3 phases. They should be within the project plan, whichever ones are appropriate. And ultimately, then that project plan should be talking about how to achieve those, the activities, who's involved, the timing, when to start and finish those. So that's another bunch of stuff. And that's all about when we're in flight. The final piece at a high level, a macro level of APQP to think about is, well, when we're in flight, don't we need to have checkpoints? You know, we need to check our flight path. So what we have is something called events, APQP PPAP events. So at points in time, we want to check the health of things. We want to make sure we're on target, we're moving in the right direction. So the next, the third chunk of what to think about is the events. Now, very simplistically, if you took that picture, stand back from all the requirements documents around you and just say, at the heart of APQP, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to get ourselves off the ground in terms of project. The planning deliverables help us do that. Once we've got off the ground, then we need to focus on the APQP and PPAP elements. And they're the things that give us the specifics of the journey we're going to travel on. And to ensure we keep on track on that journey, we have what's known as events. And they are checkpoints on our flight. So let's take things a level down now. Okay, so we've just talked about three chunks of artifacts, actions, requirements, however you want to view these. But if we looked at these three chunks at a more detailed level, what we can then start talking about then is, firstly, something more numeric. If I looked at the planning deliverables within the standards and the guidance material, it really points to 8 deliverables to think about. And so we've got 8 deliverables to get ourselves off the ground. Then when we're in flight, we have a number of checkpoints. There's potentially 12 of those. Those are the events. And then as we're progressing through flight, we've got specifics that drive us towards activities. And there's 27 of those. So your immediate reaction could be, quite rightly, what you mean we've got to do 8 times 12 times 27? God, this seems already starting. It sounds like there's quite a lot of work to do. Do we have to do this all the time? Well, firstly, is it a lot of work to do? When we break it down this simple level and consider that we're thinking about something that is going left to right on time, it doesn't mean that all these have to be applied within that window of time you're working. The next piece about it is, and to kill a myth about APQP and PPAP, in every type of change, you don't have to necessarily do all these. So it's a myth if you believe that each and every one of these must be used every single time. And really what we've put in place in terms of in regards to the world of guidance and the reference manuals we've been promoting is actually we've put a structure in place which relates to configuring these deliverables, events and elements around change situations. We describe them as change situations, and very simplistically, what's a change situation? It could be a new product design. It could be a transfer from one facility to it could be a method change. There are all types of change situations. So to sort of build the picture up, and we've mentioned these a number of times in the presentation so far, the matrices which are within the gold book. But to just help you a bit more about how these work, I'm just going to use this visual. So think of deliverables, events and elements as menus, and any menu you've got options in those. You're going to pick what you need. You can, the goal isn't to eat everything. It is very much about to focus on the specifics that are relevant to the change situation. So consider one of the things about the practices we're promoting is that we put menus in place. The menus essentially focus on change situations, and the change situations really think about one of 3 situations. A change relating to the product, so that could be a new design, it could be a change to a design. So, a brand new drawing and up to change to a drawing. It could be a works transfer, moving product and its manufacturing from facility A to facility B. Or it could be relating specifically to the manufacturing method, if that's a repair, if that's an assembly, if that's a machining. you know, there's numerous types of manufacturing methods we have within our supply chains. And the way to think of that, is it a new one? Is it a change? So with that in mind, what you'll find is with these matrices, they follow that logic. The starting point is a question really is it a new design or a design change? And kind of how the illustration shows on here, that means it points you to certain guidance within the matrix. The next piece, if it's not a design change, the product changing, either it's a new design product or there's a change to the product design, then the next piece is, well, is it a transfer? Are we physically moving the manufacturer of product from one facility to another? Not in the sense that we're changing the design, we're just physically moving it. And again, the matrices point you to the relevant thoughts around what we're talking about in terms of deliverables, elements, and events. And then the final piece then, if it's not a design of the product, if it's not a transfer, really the change must be related to the manufacturing method. So there's a process change. And again, there's levels of granularity around the types of change potentially. But that's how we sort of built this structure around helping to navigate through that flight path I'm talking about in terms of APQP and PPAP. Let's take this a little step further now and then just go into a bit more thoughts around this flight path. So I want to take you back to the beginning of the flight path and the planning phase. It's very much about the planning phase is getting yourself off the ground, and it focuses on a number of deliverables we've talked about. In regards to the events, it relates to something called kickoff to PDR, end of concept, and that's the first stage of this flight. And if we were to look at the deliverables, we can actually really consolidate them around these 4 views. Some of what's been looked at are inputs and key inputs. Some of the deliverables that have been looked at are requirements capture, understanding what's expected. Some of the deliverables are around creating a preliminary concept. And when I say a preliminary concept, that could be a design, but it also involves the manufacturing process. What is the product and how are we going to make it? And then the final set of deliverables focus on the plan creation piece. So when you think about getting off the ground and there's a set of deliverables, you can simplify it on to this level and say this is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to achieve with APQP with the planning phase. We're gonna take a flight path between kickoff and PDR, and we're going to focus on 4 key areas: inputs, requirements capture, preliminary concept, and the plan creation. Now, in the reference manual, we break those down, and you will see a tangible link to what I'm talking about to back into the requirements definitions around AS13100 as an example. You'll see these items, these deliverables being called up as requirements. We're back into the details of the specifications. But today is very much about talking about how to navigate this and keep this as a very simple view of how we can go from a point in time of APQP of starting a flight off right through to the end of it. So I'm not going to go through all these line items of the deliverables now. You can find them in the reference manual. There's appendices in there which breaks out each one and explains them a bit more and gives you a bit more thoughts around those. But they're very much as a real simple concept. It's all about some common sense inputs. Why would you not want to know what the customer's voice is, what their expectations? Why would you not want to consider history and lessons that you've learned? Why would you not want to understand what is possible through benchmarking? And there are times when you have to assume things. You may not necessarily know the facts, but you have to make some assumptions. And those are the inputs. And then when we talk about the deliverables, we break down into requirements. The requirements are about the product, what is expected, but also the project itself, a schedule. At what key milestones does the customer have in achieving specific points in time? That's an example of project targets. Preliminary concept, it's very much about the product and the process. It's not just about a design of a product. And then finally, when we talk about the plan creation, the output is a plan, but there's other factors that are built into that. We need to know what the proposed sourcing plan is, the preliminary sourcing plan, which is going to support that plan. That can be what organisations are involved, and statement of work. You know, what are some of the resources we need to execute this project financially, you know, people-wise, all those good things. And really what this is about is, if you think about any change situation, those are the basics to get you off the ground. Depending on the size of the project and the complexity, they may be, you know, to quite a depth or quite light, but those are the essence of what you would want for any type of change situation. On the theme of what are we have we put in place to support APQP and PPAP in regards to AS13100 and the reference manuals. This is just a bit of a concept to tune you into some of the parts I've talked about so far, and some of the tools that can be found within the reference manuals. I think I've talked more than enough about the planning phase. I don't want to keep going over it, but the ultimate is you understand what's required. You've got an idea of what the change is, the product, the process, and you've got the backbones to some of the planning. So you need to create a plan. So one of the key pieces to help you in that is what we've talked about, these matrices, the APQP and PPAP application matrices. You know, and see them as a driver for you in regards to menus. So which of the deliverables should you be utilising? Which of the elements you should be utilising? Which of the events should you be utilising? So that helps you get a picture of which you should be utilising. But if you want to formulate a plan, you need some expectation of when should it be starting, when should things be finishing. So there is another tool in the toolbox called the APQP and PPAP timing plan. There's a little visual of it on screen here. I'm not going to go into the details other than just to say, look, it lists out all those events, all the events against time, giving them a time view in one axis, and then it gives you the list of the elements as well. And what it helps you do is, for the elements you believe are appropriate, you know, guided by the application matrices, then you would utilize that knowledge and this timing plan to help you get a concept of when things should start and when things should finish. And with that knowledge of what should be accounted for and when should I be doing it, you can build a picture around what in regards to what needs to be taking place to design and develop and validate the products and processes involved. And that's really then when you get into the details of creating the plan you need. You know, that could be for a simple change situation, a very, very simple view in terms of what are the key activities, the timing, and who should own what. Or it could be quite a more sophisticated plan based because it is a complex project that's been executed. In both cases, the outcome is a plan, something that defines for the events and the elements, what are the activities, what's the timing and the ownership that should be taking place. Now, on the note of plan and activities and what should be taking place, what we have to really, really, really embrace about APQP is it truly is a team sport. So when I say team sport, you can examine the details around what's involved, and there's quite a bit when you walk through the different elements. But actually, if you draw back to the view of when we look at APQP and PPAP as a journey, as a flight, there are up to 27 elements that should be considered. Now, if you break those down further, and start looking at, well, where do they apply? There's 7 which are involved in the process design, the product and design phase. There's a number involved in the process of development phase. There is a number involved in validation. But what you end up doing is, what you have to appreciate is all of those touch different people in different ways. And this is the team sport piece. You know, the pink area, the product design development, very much orientated around design engineering and validation engineering and tests and that kind of thing. You talk about the process design and development, and then we can take the view of, well, that's very much manufacturing engineering, quality, operations getting involved. And then when we validate parts, we make parts and try them out and test them and collect data on them. You know, that really engages the engineering community as well as the operations community. So there's quite a lot of involvement. And then when we think about, well, we need to procure parts, the purchasing becomes an involved attribute, and so on and so on and so on. So there is quite a lot of people that can be involved in APQP. For your businesses, the big recommendation is take the APQP and PPAP timing chart. You have all the list of the elements on there, and just use something that is known as RACI. You can Google it. Just Google the letters I'm quoting here, RACI, and there's plenty of information that describes what RACIs are. And at the heart of them, what they're trying to do is just make it really clear for those who are involved, who's accountable, who's responsible, who should be informed, and who should be consulted. So if you break those down and think about it as your own business, that actually becomes a very powerful tool back into your business to help everybody understand who should be involved. If you carry out the activity, if you've done this already, you will appreciate the team sport piece. If you carry out the activity, you will then really appreciate the team sport. There's no one function which you can say APQP is solely accountable for. There's a number which are involved. To finally finish things off on this section of talking about this flight, we're just going to now just step through the phases of design and developing the product, and then getting into validation to finalize this section with the connection also with Ppap. So consider now what we've talked about. We've done the planning. We're off the ground, we've created a plan, so we now have to be enacting those plans. So what's going on? In terms of the phases of APQP, phase 2, phase 3, the product design, the development, and the process design development. Well, firstly, the pink colour in here represents the product design development phase. And when we talk about the actual flight path, really what we're doing is going from PDR to CDR. It's the little visual on the left-hand corner. Concurrently, and this is a real important thing about how APQP is executed, is there is levels of concurrent engineering going on. You know, it's not just, we don't just develop a design and say the design's there, the product, now let's think about how we make it. We run these concurrently. So on the flight path, the green area, that also is driven from PDR, but it comes in and pulls on some other events, what's called production readiness review and first article inspection, to get us to the point of what is known as initial production approval. And what's going on in this space? It's the detail activities that builds in good quality performance with the products and the processes. It's all about design for manufacturing thoughts, risk mitigation out the product through DFMEA, really developing the product design so that it can be in a state that's manufacturable, as well as it does what it's supposed to do in terms of its function as a product. Concurrently, we have the manufacturing engineering aspects going on, which is thinking about how to make the part, the product, and then how do we actually translate that into a manufacturing method. That could be a repair, that could be an assembly, that could be cutting metal of the part, whatever the processing that's relevant to that product. But what it definitely gets into is understanding potential risks through process FMEA and mitigating those, and ensuring we've got a high caliber quality inspection system in place, and a whole raft of important things that relate to the actual manufacturing method and developing that. Relating back to the elements, I'm not going to go through the list, but you know, associated to these two phases are the elements you see on screen now. The total of these are 18. Those of you who are quick on the maths will know that I've said 27, and all I've done is mention 18 at the moment. So there's some more elements missing, which leads us into the next phase of APQP. Again, so what's the flight path? This is all about validating the product and process. This is very much about making product, you know, testing it, examining it, checking out it does what it should do, so that we're confident that the process meets the design intent, but also has a capability to supply at rate, to supply to the quality standards we expect. What's the flight path that's going on? Well, that's over in the top left-hand corner again. Yellow represents the product and process validation phase, and that is now moving from the production readiness review event through first article into PPAP approval, and then ultimately where we're getting to is the production launch. Production launch is the end of the journey in terms of the flight. To complete the list of the 27 elements, you can see these on screen now. And really at the heart of what the validation is trying to do is, and to quote Deming, you know, without data, we've just got, we're just another person with opinion. At the heart of validation, it's speaking with data. It's capturing information about the test inspection system, the verification system that you deploy it. Because we want to make sure it's a good one, we want to make sure it's a capable one, bringing measurement system analysis as a support to determining that. It's also about capturing data on quality of the process itself, you know, right first time, defects per unit values, to understand that the performance of the process is good, as well as where there's really important characteristics, understanding capability values, so CPKs. But there's also within the suite of elements something called initial manufacturing performance studies. And this is very much centered on, can you achieve the rate of the process? And the best way to understand that is to measure the process in terms of how long it's taken to make parts and rub that up against your original assumptions, targets in regards to what was expected. If we're meeting the targets for rate, quality, then we can be confident in the process. So the final couple of pieces now on the slot I'm covering is one, just to elevate back now and think about the last chunk of focus for APQP. I've talked quite a lot about the deliverables, the planned deliverables. I talked a lot about the elements. But what I haven't done is really majors on the events themselves. Coming back to the analogy of this is a flight path we're going through. We need checkpoints on our path. And that's the role of the events. So the way of seeing events are, firstly, they provide a team with timing. And what I mean by that is they give an expectation of what should be achieved at points in time. So the team that is developing the product and process, they've got expectations of what they should be achieving. But what it also does is it helps teams synchronize. It's not infrequent that when a change is going on within the supply chain, there is a number of teams that can be involved in that change at different layers of the supply chain. So what actually the events do is by laying out these events and the expectation of these events as a project, we can help teams synchronize. The supply chain can synchronize, achieve certain points in time. From team to team, we can synchronize because, again, the teams are working to achieve certain points together. And then within the team themselves, members of the team can also synchronize themselves because they are working together to achieve certain points in time. So see events as something that provides a timing relationship and synchronization. The final piece is see them as also approval decision points. Within the reference material, there's details around these, but the way of in regards to the approval decisions. But the way to sort of see this is these are points to either confirm that we should go forwards or stop and fix. Stop and fix in the sense of let's resolve what needs to be achieved at that point in time. So in terms of the reference material, you will find past criteria against all these events. They've been mindful of the application of these events in different change situations. So you'll find that there's guidance in there and suggestion what they should be. The criteria on their own isn't enough. You need the right behaviours in the business when dealing with these checkpoints. So it's really important to promote transparency of the results, what the results are, and strong leadership values around those. Let's think about how we can fix the problems. It's really important to also build these events within your organisation's project management processes and practices, and also the review structures, because they're giving you the understanding of timing and synchronisation, really helpful for the project management aspect, and the approval decision points, the go forwards and stop and fix are really important when we talk about review structures. And something that can really help this and make it clearer what the expectations are is something called Rapids, and it's mentioned in the reference books. But you can Google rapid decision making. Plenty of information again on the internet on this, and essentially what it's doing is making it really clear who the decider is, and then who should be recommending the information. Too often businesses can get too tangled with believing that there's too many people that have to sign things off, when the truth is that if you'd stared at what needs to be considered, you can break it down to very clear deciders and then who should be providing information to support that decision. So the final piece really in terms of talking about APQP and PPAP is to actually make now the link to PPAP. All the way through this presentation, I've been strongly talking about APQP. Prior to this section, a lot of the conversation was about PPAP. And really, the point here really is to think about is actually APQP, the way of seeing APQP and the relationship with PPAP is APQP is driving activity. It's based on a set of elements that it's driving this journey, this flight path. So what's the role of PPAP? Well, PPAP's the evidence piece in this. It's if you were to sort of look at this journey if you consider this flight path as a journey, as we've talked about, APQP is the sat nav in it all. It's giving us the direction of what to do at what time. So what's the role of PPAP? It's the evidence. It's the traffic lights at a point in time. It's based on evidence. We are confirming that the requirements have been properly understood, and through making a sufficient number of parts that we demonstrate the capability there, the potential to produce the product is there. So what you end up with is a view that the role of the APQP is very much about the drive the activity. The activity can be seen as the sat nav, the guidance in terms of what is expected to take place at what time. That activity is very much centered around a group of people, a team, a cross-functional team, which are deploying the activities to achieve what is expected to take place. In terms of PPAP, what we want is at that point in time is evidence that demonstrates compliance to some of these elements. The mapping on screen now is just highlighted when you take the 27 elements of APQP and PPAP. Which ones of those are actually the pieces that are used as evidence? And what you see is that there's a listing, and this was what was referred to in, or these elements were what were referred to in the earlier section about the Ppap submission and file. So my final notes on this one is, and I'll hand it over to Robert, the next section, is just think of APQP as your flight path. You can break it down into some simple chunks, deliverables, elements, and events. We work our way through that flight path based on good, sound guidance that helps you understand which ones of those are relevant to the change situation. And the role of Ppap in all this is at a point in time, on the right-hand side of the time cycle of doing this flight, is that we have a confirmation point, and that's based on evidence. And that is centered on the specific elements that are drawn out in terms of Ppap. I will now hand over to Robert.
Thank you, Carl, for that great overview. And hopefully I can continue on some of the same themes as we get into the next section, which goes into phase 5. So as Carl said, I'm Rob Latour. Been in industry 19 years. And throughout that career, I've been able to hold positions in manufacturing, in quality, and engineering. So as we think of the APQP flight path that we are on, all those functions, working together to create the successful outcome that we were just talking about. And if we can go to the next slide, Carl. Yeah, as Carl said, we've reached the point that we are in production. We've reached the end of that flight path, but that doesn't mean we close the book on the program, right? In phase 5, we are going to be monitoring our performance compared to those targets that were set at the beginning of that APQP journey in the planning phase. And as we look at those targets, we're going to look at how the product is performing compared to what the customer wants. We're going to be looking at how our business is performing to safety, quality, delivery, cost targets. And all those metrics are going to help us identify continuous improvement, which means that there's going to be change. And you heard all the other speakers mention change over and over again, because change is a part of life, change is a part of every program and product that we produce. So APQP and Ppap, while it's designed and used through the initial product development and into production, it is also used as a continuous improvement cycle as we work through these changes. And the same themes that you've heard over and over again are going to continue here. Right, we need to start upfront with really solid planning, right? Every change, while it may be intended for improvement and good, has risk associated with it. Those changes, may not work exactly as designed. They may have unintended consequences. So we're going to use the APQP and Ppap to help us understand and identify those potential risks, manage those risks, and help us be successful in implementing these changes to give us the best chance for improvement that we're trying to drive. And just like Carl was laying out, when we're launching a change project, it's really going back through the APQP cycle and setting a new flight path. So we're going to utilize the information that we have in the standards and the reference material to help guide us through the planning and laying out that flight path through the change process. And so the tables you see here show guidance information from RM 13145 on how to think through these various change situations. And, similar to what Carl was talking about, we want to start first with the big picture phases and think through, given this type of change situation, what is the applicability and configuration we need to do to the APQP phases to help properly manage the change. And so you look at the table, the white sections are for product design. So we may have a new product design coming through the system or a modification that's coming through. And, we're going to want to implement, that change through the full phases of APQP, all phases 1, 2, 3, and 4 applied the way Carl just walked through. Given the scope of the change, we may configure some of the activity within those phases to be specific to that scope. The green areas are process changes. So these are changes that are not product specific, but are in the supply chain. So these could be site transfers, implementing new processes, maybe some new technology to help us with some of our issues. Processing changes like changing parameters or sequence of existing processes, down into tooling changes. And as you see in the table, the type of change is going to dictate and change some of the application of the phases. So for non-product changes, we're not going to do the product design and development phases. We're going to focus on the process-related phases. When we get into processing changes, we're going to have much more limited upfront planning because the scope of the change is going to be much smaller. And so the basic message is, we need to lay out this flight path early and put a lot of planning in place up front to give us the best chance for success and configure those changes so that we can end up with that good project plan that we talked about going through the first cycle of APQP to manage these changes and make sure we have the resource allocation ready to best successfully implement the change. So once we've laid out these phases, we can go to the next slide and lay out the waypoints for the flight path, just like Carl talked through, and look at the events. And the events are a good opportunity, again, to help us both look at applicability of the event, but also to configure the events based on the scope of the change. So the larger, more complex the change, you're going to have more events and done to the full set of requirements laid out. And then smaller changes, smaller in scope, down to a single process, you're going to look at the event in a little bit different manner, focused in on what is actually in scope for that particular change, right? So, it starts up front with the kickoff. When you're doing a change project, you want to kick off and do that upfront planning. Carl showed that curve, about putting in the investment up front. I like to think of the saying, you have to go slow to go fast, right? When we're trying to implement these changes, we want to see the benefits of the change, whether it be, process improvements, driving quality improvements. Maybe it's a customer issue we're trying to respond to. There's a pressure in there to implement the changes as quickly as we can. But sometimes when you do that, you can, again, drive some of those unintended consequences. So we want to make sure we do the proper upfront planning, hold the kickoff, lay out the flight path, lay out the waypoints, and understand what are the resource and timing, necessary to execute APQP for this particular change, scope to the change appropriately so that we can be successful by the time we get to the point of implementation. And, similar to the phases, you're going to see the application of these events change for the various types of change situations. So for product design changes, either new designs or modifications, you see the full suite of events laid out because you need to walk that new design through the full APQP and make sure we understand what are all the design parameters. Are we meeting our customer requirements? Have we set up our manufacturing process to align with that new design and new changes? Do we need to make any changes to the manufacturing process or supply chain as part of that? In the green section, again, the non-product changes, various levels of complexity. Right? If we're changing to a new facility, we're essentially setting up brand new processes, a new value stream maybe. You're going to see a large set of events, but they can be configured to focus on the aspects of that new facility, right? Is that new facility for, maybe one particular detail or one particular set of processes, or is it the full, value stream or full supply chain that's changing as part of that, transfer? When you get into process changes, inserting new technology, again, we want to walk through the full set of events, but focused on that particular technology that's being implemented, not the full value stream. So you want to understand what is impacted by that change and what is affected by that change going forward. And then, when you're getting into more detailed changes, like a process change and changing maybe some specific parameters of one process step, again, you're going to further configure the details of these events down to the aspects related and match the scope of that particular parameter change focus in on what are the aspects of the supply chain that are impacted, if any, what particular characteristics are going to be impacted or affected by that particular change, and scope each of these events appropriately. Right. And then now that you have your waypoints, you can start executing details. So if we go to the next slide, we're down into the elements, right? So again, opportunity here to really configure the execution of the elements to match what you're doing in your particular change. And so when you're going through those APQP phases and you're hitting those timing points, you're updating your PPAP file. You know, Mike talked about the file being a real live living document, and you want to continue that as you're going through this, right? So as you're laying out the new process that you're putting in place, do you have an updated process flow diagram? Are there modifications to the sequence, or are the characteristics within that process flow? Or do you have to come up with new factory floor layouts? Do you need to update your PFMEA, right? Understand what characteristics are created or affected by the particular change. Is it a single process step or a full value stream? You know, is it an opportunity to maybe start rolling in some of the lessons learned from early production that, you know, you can utilize this change to update those FMEAs? Looking at your measurement systems, are there any measurement systems impacted by the change? Do they need to be, changed or updated with new MSA studies and new data? And then finally into the validation, when you're getting into process capability studies, dimensional results, right? Building the case that the change has been implemented, you could validate that the change was done with a high level of capability. You're able to meet those project requirements that are laid out, early in the change project, and ultimately result in a resubmission of your PPAP with the updated information related to that scope of the change. Okay, so again, same common theme and message, right? We want to plan upfront, understand what is the new flight path, what are the waypoints, how do we have to configure those waypoints to match the scope of the change, and then execute the elements configured to that scope of the change so that we can meet the intent of implementing the change with appropriate risk mitigation to try to prevent any unintended consequences and have our best chance of success for the improvement that we were intending for implementing the change up front. Okay, so with that, I think we are set to move to the next section and wrap up and to answer some questions.
So we have the poll open. People have been answering questions as we go along here, but I'm going to move on to the next question. Right now, the question that is open is, have you read RM 13145? So let's move on to the next poll here. I will launch this. This is, are you using RM 13145 as a guide for APQP and PPAP? So if you want to go ahead and answer that poll question. Oh, 40 votes already. We'll give it a few more seconds here. Everyone can get their vote in. And we can go back and do a recap when we're done. 90 votes. A few more seconds and we'll move on to the next question. Okay, we have 100 votes in on that one. Let's move on to the next question here. How would you judge your knowledge of APQP? So we'll give you a little bit of extra time here to go through the options and answer. $80 votes. 90 votes. Let's get a few more responses. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Next question is, how would you judge your knowledge of PPAP? Looks like the votes are coming in. We have 90 votes. A few more seconds. Okay, 116 votes on that one. Let's move on to how well is your business deploying APQP? Looks like the votes are coming in, 50 votes. A few more seconds. We'll give everyone a chance to submit their vote. How well is your business deploying APQP? $92 votes. A few more seconds. There's 100 votes received. All right. And then let's move on to our last question here. What additional topics would you like us to cover in future webinars? What would you find helpful? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that one. I see MSA, PFMEA, first article inspection, process control, lots of good ideas. And just so everyone knows, AESQ does have a list of past webinars on their website. We record all of these events, so those videos are available for free viewing if you're interested. I know there is a first article one and a couple of others on there right now. It looks like we have 60 people that have submitted ideas. This is great. Thank you. A few more ideas coming in. Let's just give it a few more seconds here, and then we can move on to review the questions or the results. All right, we'll go ahead and close that, and we can review the results. So for the first question, we said, have you read 13,100? We had 68% people say yes, 32% said no. The second question, have you read RM 13145? 31% said yes, 69% no. Are you using RM 13145 as a guide for APQP and PPAP? 43% said yes, 57% said no. How would you judge your knowledge of APQP? 4% did not have knowledge. 46% said I know of it, but no experience using it. 37% said I have used it a few times. And 13%, I consider myself to be an expert. Then how would you judge your knowledge of PPAP? We had 6% with no knowledge, 35% said I know of it, but no experience using it. 41% have used it a few times, and 19% I consider myself to be an expert. And then how well is your business deploying APQP? So 7% said not capable and have no plan to facilitate capability. 21% said not capable but have a plan to facilitate capability. 24% said capable and have no improvement plan to increase capability. And 47% said capable and have an improvement plan to improve capability. And then our last question there was asking about additional topics to cover in future webinars. So that gives us a lot to talk about there. So I will give it back to the team now to wrap things up.
So I'll stop sharing the slide pack, and then we can move over to what guys have picked up on.
Yes, hello. My name is Magnus Holm. I'm working with supplier quality for GKN Aerospace. And I have a long background, but I worked in the automotive and aerospace industry, and sort of always close to product development and quality assurance. And I have my colleague Åke in the room.
Yes, my name is Åke Winkvist, and I have a total experience of APQP and PPAP from 25 years, mainly from automotive, and the last years within aerospace.
Yes. So we have been monitoring the chat during the webinar, and there haven't been that many questions, but we have two questions. First one that maybe you can answer, Rebecca. Where do we find past presentations, specifically first article inspection?
So everything is on the AESQ website. If you just go on there, it's easy to find events, whether it's future events or past events. There's a tab right at the top of the web page.
Yeah.
And the presentations are all posted there. And we will post this presentation there as soon as we're done.
Yeah. And then there is one very good question, which maybe I will ask Robert or Carl to address. And that is, if you, let's see if I can read this. If you have a legacy assembly where a PPAP currently does not exist, and you change the machining source on one of the many components, does this prompt the requirement for a PPAP on the delivery assembly? I think it's part of the subject you talked about, Robert.
Yeah, I think if I understand the question right, so you have a detail being manufactured, the detail's going to transitioning to a new facility, right? So you have a transition activity going on there, so there's a change project in itself. And that transition has the potential to impact you at the assembly level. So yeah. I think, what you would want to be thinking through is the scope of that particular detail at the assembly level and how that particular detail might impact you there, right? So thinking through your phases of developing your assembly process or the potential impact to your assembly process, what types of risk that could implement, and how would you want to manage that risk to ensure your assembly process could continue to operate smoothly. So it may or may not trigger a full application. You may not need every specific aspect of APQP and PPAP because it's specific to a single detail, but you would want to understand the risks associated with that new detail or potentially new detail into your assembly process. Now, if the other folks want to add anything to there.
Yeah, and then there is a question that came in just a minute ago. Does PPAP apply to existing parts that have no changes or only minor administrative changes as of January the 1st? GE stated that they may apply. What does may apply mean? Maybe if Michael could have a go at that, maybe.
Yeah, I think the answer to this question ties directly into what Rob just mentioned. And Rob, I think overall you said it really well. You have to go slow to go fast. And in every case, you want to assess the risks of the change that is that's being managed, because the primary objective, as we saw on Carl's slides, is we want to improve quality, reduce cost, right? So in every change situation, no matter if you have an existing PPAP submission approved or not, we want to assess what elements of APQP and PPAP we can apply to help the project move forward and improve quality, reduce cost, and that's the pragmatic viewpoint of APQP is just that. So I think the applicability matrix that you shared, Rob, in your slides, it really was built and intended, to apply for previously approved APQP hardware. But we're going to be in a space come January 1st where we're migrating. We have existing hardware in the pipeline, and when we undergo change, we need to assess each change adequately. And when I said we may require, or there may be required to apply PPAP or other APQP elements to an existing piece of hardware, that really is going to be customer specific. And it's to answer that question, you need to tie in with your customers on the specific situation. You need to understand what their requirements are, and really just reach out to your customers in those situations in order to understand what their expectations are. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think if I summarize, what we say is that you sort of always configure the plan to meet the change so it makes sense. I think that's what we're saying.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
In every situation, you want to apply the applicability matrix.
Then there is another question. What about existing parts that are not going to change? And I think the short answer to that is that if there is no change, there is no requirement for APQP and PPAP.
That's the important thing to remember. This is about change management. So what's changing is your scope for APQP, and then ultimately the evidence around PPAP is a simple way. So if there's no product, I guess I hear this question a few times. It's always difficult when you just read a question. We could misread or misunderstand. But if it meant comes like January next year, my customer is saying you have to do APQP and PPAP, does that mean we have to go over every part in the past? Well, it's what's changing. If the part's in production, there's no engineering change. No. But when change is invoked, it's what's the scope of that change. And the best thing always is just consult the customer. Come back to the customer and just say, what's your thoughts on this? Is what I would give as a description. And I think that complements what both Michael and Robert says.
Yeah, I think that's about it so far. There are no further questions on the chat, but I think it would be a good idea if we mentioned how you can get in touch with us if you have questions. So maybe you can.
Yes, I think that was more or less everything for today's webinar. On the AESQ website, there are more questions and answers. Email address also where you can send in questions. and the web page will be updated with those questions and answers. All resources will be available on the AESQ website within a few days. Also, an email will be sent out to all registrants with a link. And with that, we will all thank you for participating in today's webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.